I mentioned before that we had, let's say, a blue team and a red team. And they were actually First African Independent Lodge, which of North America, which Absalom Jones was our first Grand Master. And then about 20 years later, we had a Hiram Grand Lodge after several brothers and lodges split away from us. So again, blue team, red team. And they came back together in 1847 and formed a National Grand Lodge. Now you got a purple team. So blue, red, and I always like to use the analogy, kissed and made up. And then they were oversaw by a National Grand Lodge with a National Grand Master. And here is that actual attendees at the National Grand Lodge at the time that formed that purple team. And it was members from Hiram Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, First African Independent Lodge of Pennsylvania, and we also had a lodge from New York, and of course we had Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And Rhode Island at that time came under Massachusetts, so they all formed the National Grand Lodge. The last Grand Master of the National Grand Lodge as we know it, as Prince Hall affiliated Masons, was Richard Howell Gleaves. And he actually was a member of St. Cyprian Lodge 13, which was the first lodge west of the Alleghenies. But he became a National Grand Master, and as we know it, the National Grand Lodge folded by 1877. So we have that. Right here on this row, we already mentioned Prince Hall received his charter in 1784. And we have a replica of that charter on the far wall as we came in. Now we're going to talk just about the United Grand Lodge of England. We got that charter, or Prince Hall got that charter, from the Premier Grand Lodge. And the Premier Grand Lodge, the acting Grand Master in 1784 was the Earl of Effingham, Thomas Howard. And here's a picture of Thomas Howard. And he brings greetings right at the top of that charter. And he lets you know that he's the acting Grand Master. And he's bringing greetings on behalf of the Grand Master, who was King George III's brother. And that was the Duke of Cumberland. And his name was Henry Frederick. He's the Duke of Cumberland. So here's a depiction of the acting Grand Master who issued the charter for for Prince Hall in 1784. And here's a picture of the Duke of Cumberland, who was the Grand Master at the time of the Premier Grand Lodge. When they united, because they had already split, you had the ancients and the moderns. The Premier Grand Lodge were the moderns. The other Grand Lodge were the ancients. By 1813, they came back together and became the United Grand Lodge of England. And both of King George's sons were the Grand Master at the time. King George was still alive, but he was senile. So that's why we have, till today, the United Grand Lodge of England. So they had the modern ancients, they came back together. Okay? And so they came back together. And then we actually started a recognition and relationship with them because we didn't have a relationship with them after 1813. We were purged from the rolls, and all African lodges in the United States were purged from the rolls during that time. So we didn't actually come back together. We came state by state, and we really didn't start until the late 1900s. And by here in Pennsylvania, we weren't recognized until, I believe, around 1980s. We came back together. It was started by our past Grand Master, George Calloway, and Samuel Williamson, of the Right Worshipful Grand Lodge at 1 North Broad. And they did it through the youth groups. That's how they started the recognition and relationship again. And by the time, I think 1996 or thereabouts, where Thomas Jackman became the Grand Master, we actually started recognizing each other.
Yes.
Okay. And I just wanted to show you a replica of 1 North Broad Street, one of the I guess most ornate and elaborate temples in the United States.
Yes.
At 1 North Broad. This is the actual calendar, and we had it framed, and it still actually has the pages of the calendar starting with January 1950 there, and it actually has all 12 months in there, and we actually had it framed. We found it rolled up down in our sub-basement, but we were able to preserve it, and it actually has George H. Gould, who was the Grand Master at the time. The other people on here, Henry Horner, who also, when we were out talking about the first district building at 17th and Diamond, it used to be Eccles School of Mortuary Science, and he was one of the instrumental people to help purchase that property. And then he was the actual Deputy Grand Master at the time. And then, of course, right behind him was George W. Gaines, who actually died in office in 1953. So he only served 1 year, and the rest of the officers during that period. When we first started our museum here, we wanted to include our female houses and all of their houses here. And so we left this end of our museum for that. And since that time, we actually have, at least for the Order of Eastern Stars, we have another room with most of their portraits and a little bit of their regalia down at that end. We also have some of their documentation and some of their magazines and so forth, and rituals and pictures we have just in this area.
So if you notice what we've done is basically within this case here and this showcase down here, we've tried to put some of the heads of the houses, this being the female side here and this predominantly the male side here, almost as bookends, so we could just say that this is all Prince Hall's history. And as Philip made mention, although this is just part of the female side of the organization, we're very involved with them, assisting them in their library, which is down at the other end of the hallway. Just wanted to make sure we mention that, so we include everyone within our Prince Hall history. On the wall here, we have some other pictures of current pictures of brothers. We have Knights Pythagoras. We even have an apron that was given to us from the Grand Council by the Knights Pythagoras.
The top one here, when Bob mentioned the Knights of Pythagoras, we always like to know about that relationship that was came together with the Knights of Pythagoras and the Boys of D. Malay. And this is out at their Elizabethtown campus, and which is near Harrisburg area, in the central part of the state. And so that was one of the many meetings of those two groups, youth groups, and that sort of started the relationship between Prince Hall Masons and the Right Worshipful Grand Lodge. And here we have just a few interesting things. We'll try to run through this section here. Right here, we're actually visiting down in Washington, D.C. We're visiting one of our congressmen, who was Lucian Blackwell of 120, Sons of Light 120. And this picture, I'm going to say, was taken roughly in the 1993 period. I believe the Grand Master at the time was Roland Lee Sr. and all his officers and his corps of officers, many first district officers, and whoever could just get on the bus. So a busload of people. And so we traditionally did like a yearly visit to our congressmen, and it started with Bill Gray and a few other congressmen, and then it went over to, of course, Lucian Blackwell once Bill Gray left as the, I think at that time was the majority whip of the House of Representatives. Right below that is a picture of Ethiopia Lodge number 75 in 1966. I did briefly mention Bishop Levi Coppin, and he became our deputy to Africa. He was in Bethel 47, and when he did a missionary work over in Africa, he started 2 Prince Hall lodges, and Ethiopia Lodge was 75 was the first lodge, and then Coppin Lodge number 76, which was in Kimberley, South Africa at the time. One of the interesting things is they use a class system over in South Africa. So either you were black, you were colored, or you were white. And these Masons were Prince Hall Masons, but they were colored. They were mixed. What we know today as back then mulattoes and so forth. So, and this is a picture of them. Of course, they joined the Grand Lodge of South Africa in 1977, and they had no more affiliation with us. They asked permission from us to leave, and it was granted in 1976, I believe, and by November 1977, they left our jurisdiction. So they were with us for 75 years, okay? This is one of the pictures, and this is a modern drawing. It was drawn recently, and this was our school, Orphanage and Farm in Linglestown, and young lady drew that from the description given her out at our Linglestown property. We still own the 65 acres there, but of course everything's overgrown and all the actual real property is no longer there. It's either all fallen down. I think there's only the steps are there of any of the buildings that we used to have. But that's just a depiction of what we actually had out in Linglestown during the 1920s and 30s. One of the earliest square clubs was the Brotherly Love Square Club of Philadelphia Lodge number 74. And at first we thought it was a picture of just past masters, because a lot of past masters from that lodge are on here. But then we have a lot of people right up front who weren't past masters, so that killed that right away. And so it's just a lot. And then we also had other members from other lodges. And in fact, we have a couple past grandmasters. One from Philadelphia Lodge 74, and then way in the back we have Henry Moses Bazemore, who was sort of a protege of Henry Horner's, who everybody affectionately called Uncle P, and he's in that picture. So that was just a Brotherly Love Square Club function, and they took that picture. Over here, Bill Reddy Cash. And he was a member of Light Elmwood 45, but he's also a famous catcher of the Negro Leagues and the Philadelphia Stars. And that's a picture of him, I guess, during the heyday of the Negro Leagues. And it's just a caricature of him. We also have a picture of him in our history book. And I always like to show this one only because it actually is a picture of all the brothers from our remaining 9 districts. We actually had 11 districts in Pennsylvania, and now we're down to 9, and we sort of just jumbled it up as Masons do. So first district's down here and second district's over there, and right in the middle is the 9th District. So, but those are just pictures of Masons doing what we do, and in certain settings and meetings at all 9 districts. So that's what we wanted to do there. Here is another broadside. When we turned 100 in 1915, John Paul Scott of Children Friends 43 was the Grand Master, and of course William Henry Miller, who served as Grand Secretary, and he was a past Grand Master. And we had a Centennial Celebration, and that was the old broadside, and that's the actual original in that frame. Here is dedication, 1968, of Progress Plaza in Philadelphia. And Father Thomas Logan, who lived to be 100 years old, he actually was Grand Master at the time. Alvin Squiggett is next to him. He was Grand Master, I believe, just a few years after Father Logan. And then, of course, we have Reverend Leon H. Sullivan, and he actually was the founder and director of Opportunity Industrial
Center. OIC.
OIC.
Got the building named after him downtown?
Yes.
Yes. And he was very instrumental in having in getting the sponsorship to get Progress Plaza built. And this is the dedication of Progress Plaza. And you can see the sea of Masons there for that dedication. Reverend Sullivan was in James W. Grant 131. So, all Masons. And then finally, I'll stop here and then let Bob take it over again. But we actually just have a picture of the front door or the front of our Grand Lodge Temple, which is in Wilkinsburg, PA, right outside of Pittsburgh. And that temple was, I think, purchased and set up around 1983, I'm going to say. And that's the Temple West, Grand Lodge Temple West. So just have a picture of it just to show that we're not just all in the East, even though a lot of history was in the East and we spread west. We didn't talk much about Martin Delaney on the other side of the room. Well, we do have a picture of Martin Delaney when he was, I believe, a senior warden. And then he went on to become the highest ranking officer in the U.S. Colored Troops back during the Civil War. About Jacob White and his son, and all their names are on here. Reverend J.C. Gibbs is on here. William D. Fortin is on here. He was the son of James Fortin. And you'll see all the names here. They were called to arms. Robert M. Adger was a Mason. You have several Grand Masters on here who were Masons at the time. William E. Gibson. J.W. Cassie was in Laurel No. 2. His cousin was in A.D. Cassie was in, he was actually a Grand Lodge officer. We had James Needham, who was a Grand Master, and so forth. So.